Make allowance for.
Make allowance for.
を考慮に入れる。
They made allowance for the delay in their plans.
They made allowance for the delay in their plans.
彼らは計画の遅れを考慮に入れた。
She made allowance for his inexperience.
She made allowance for his inexperience.
彼女は彼の未経験を考慮に入れた。
He made allowance for the weather when planning the event.
He made allowance for the weather when planning the event.
彼はイベントを計画する際に天候を考慮に入れた。
Make allowance for.
Make allowance for.
Name A after B.
Name A after B.
B の名前を取って A と名付ける。
They named their son after his grandfather.
They named their son after his grandfather.
彼らは祖父の名前を取って息子を名付けた。
She named her cat after her favorite singer.
She named her cat after her favorite singer.
彼女はお気に入りの歌手の名前を取って猫を名付けた。
He named the new project after a famous explorer.
He named the new project after a famous explorer.
彼は有名な探検家の名前を取って新しいプロジェクトを名付けた。
Name A after B.
Name A after B.
Of course.
Of course.
もちろん。
Of course, you can come to the party.
Of course, you can come to the party.
もちろん、パーティーに来てもいいですよ。
She said she would help, of course.
She said she would help, of course.
もちろん、彼女は手伝うと言った。
He agreed, of course.
He agreed, of course.
もちろん、彼は同意した。
Of course.
Of course.
On the contrary.
On the contrary.
それどころか。
He wasn't tired. On the contrary, he felt full of energy.
He wasn't tired. On the contrary, he felt full of energy.
彼は疲れていなかった。それどころか、エネルギーが満ちていた。
She didn't find it difficult. On the contrary, she thought it was easy.
She didn't find it difficult. On the contrary, she thought it was easy.
彼女はそれを難しいとは思わなかった。それどころか、簡単だと思った。
The weather wasn't bad. On the contrary, it was perfect for a picnic.
The weather wasn't bad. On the contrary, it was perfect for a picnic.
天気は悪くなかった。それどころか、ピクニックに最適だった。
On the contrary.
On the contrary.
On time.
On time.
時間通りに。
She always arrives on time.
She always arrives on time.
彼女はいつも時間通りに到着する。
The train left on time.
The train left on time.
電車は時間通りに出発した。
They completed the project on time.
They completed the project on time.
彼らはプロジェクトを時間通りに完了した。
On time.
On time.
Out of breath.
Out of breath.
息切れして。
She was out of breath after running up the stairs.
She was out of breath after running up the stairs.
彼女は階段を駆け上がった後、息切れしていた。
He was out of breath from playing soccer.
He was out of breath from playing soccer.
彼はサッカーをして息切れしていた。
They were out of breath after the workout.
They were out of breath after the workout.
彼らはトレーニング後に息切れしていた。
Out of breath.
Out of breath.
Out of the question.
Out of the question.
論外で。
Going out in this storm is out of the question.
Going out in this storm is out of the question.
この嵐の中外でするのは論外だ。
Quitting now is out of the question.
Quitting now is out of the question.
今辞めるのは論外だ。
For her, missing the event was out of the question.
For her, missing the event was out of the question.
彼女にとって、そのイベントを欠席するのは論外だった。
Out of the question.
Out of the question.
Pay a visit to.
Pay a visit to.
を訪問する。
She plans to pay a visit to her grandparents.
She plans to pay a visit to her grandparents.
彼女は祖父母を訪問する予定だ。
He paid a visit to the museum.
He paid a visit to the museum.
彼は博物館を訪問した。
They paid a visit to their friend's new house.
They paid a visit to their friend's new house.
彼らは友人の新しい家を訪問した。
Pay a visit to.
Pay a visit to.
Persist in.
Persist in.
に固執する。
She persisted in her efforts despite the setbacks.
She persisted in her efforts despite the setbacks.
彼女は挫折にもかかわらず努力を続けた。
He persisted in asking questions until he understood.
He persisted in asking questions until he understood.
彼は理解するまで質問を続けた。
They persisted in their quest for justice.
They persisted in their quest for justice.
彼らは正義の追求に固執した。
Persist in.
Persist in.
Point out.
Point out.
を指摘する。
She pointed out the mistakes in the report.
She pointed out the mistakes in the report.
彼女は報告書の間違いを指摘した。
He pointed out the benefits of the new system.
He pointed out the benefits of the new system.
彼は新しいシステムの利点を指摘した。
They pointed out the need for more research.
They pointed out the need for more research.
彼らはさらに研究が必要だと指摘した。
Point out.
Point out.
Put out.
Put out.
を消す。
He put out the fire with a bucket of water.
He put out the fire with a bucket of water.
彼はバケツの水で火を消した。
She put out the candles before leaving the room.
She put out the candles before leaving the room.
彼女は部屋を出る前にキャンドルを消した。
They put out the lights when they went to bed.
They put out the lights when they went to bed.
彼らは寝るときにライトを消した。
Put out.
Put out.
Run out.
Run out.
使い果たす。
They ran out of milk, so they went to the store.
They ran out of milk, so they went to the store.
彼らは牛乳を使い果たしたので、店に行った。
She ran out of ideas for the project.
She ran out of ideas for the project.
彼女はプロジェクトのアイデアを使い果たした。
He ran out of patience waiting in line.
He ran out of patience waiting in line.
彼は列に並んでいる間に忍耐力を使い果たした。
Run out.
Run out.
Set in.
Set in.
始まる。
The rainy season has set in.
The rainy season has set in.
雨季が始まった。
A feeling of unease set in among the workers.
A feeling of unease set in among the workers.
労働者の間に不安感が広がった。
Winter has set in, bringing cold weather.
Winter has set in, bringing cold weather.
冬が始まり、寒い天気がやってきた。
Set in.
Set in.
Set out for.
Set out for.
に向けて出発する。
They set out for the mountains early in the morning.
They set out for the mountains early in the morning.
彼らは早朝に山に向けて出発した。
She set out for the airport with plenty of time.
She set out for the airport with plenty of time.
彼女は時間を十分にとって空港に向けて出発した。
He set out for a new adventure abroad.
He set out for a new adventure abroad.
彼は新しい冒険に向けて海外に出発した。
Set out for.
Set out for.
Stand up for.
Stand up for.
を支持する。
She stood up for her beliefs during the debate.
She stood up for her beliefs during the debate.
彼女は討論の間、自分の信念を支持した。
He stood up for his friend in the argument.
He stood up for his friend in the argument.
彼は議論の中で友人を支持した。
They stood up for their rights in the meeting.
They stood up for their rights in the meeting.
彼らは会議で自分たちの権利を支持した。
Stand up for.
Stand up for.
Take into account.
Take into account.
を考慮に入れる。
They took into account the weather when planning the event.
They took into account the weather when planning the event.
彼らはイベントを計画する際に天気を考慮に入れた。
She took into account his experience before making the decision.
She took into account his experience before making the decision.
彼女は決定を下す前に彼の経験を考慮に入れた。
He took into account all the feedback from his team.
He took into account all the feedback from his team.
彼はチームからのフィードバックをすべて考慮に入れた。
Take into account.
Take into account.
Take on.
Take on.
を引き受ける。
She decided to take on the new project.
She decided to take on the new project.
彼女は新しいプロジェクトを引き受けることにした。
He took on more responsibilities at work.
He took on more responsibilities at work.
彼は職場でより多くの責任を引き受けた。
They took on the challenge with enthusiasm.
They took on the challenge with enthusiasm.
彼らは熱意を持って挑戦を引き受けた。
Take on.
Take on.
Think over.
Think over.
をよく考える。
She needs to think over the offer before deciding.
She needs to think over the offer before deciding.
彼女は決定する前にその申し出をよく考える必要がある。
He thought over the problem carefully.
He thought over the problem carefully.
彼は問題を慎重に考えた。
They thought over the plan and made some changes.
They thought over the plan and made some changes.
彼らは計画をよく考え、いくつかの変更を加えた。
Think over.
Think over.
Turn down.
Turn down.
を拒絶する。
She turned down the job offer.
She turned down the job offer.
彼女は仕事のオファーを拒絶した。
He turned down the invitation to the party.
He turned down the invitation to the party.
彼はパーティーの招待を拒絶した。
They turned down the request for more time.
They turned down the request for more time.
彼らはもっと時間が欲しいという要求を拒絶した。
Turn down.
Turn down.
Wait on.
Wait on.
に仕える。
The waiter waited on the guests attentively.
The waiter waited on the guests attentively.
ウェイターは丁寧に客に仕えた。
She waited on her elderly parents.
She waited on her elderly parents.
彼女は高齢の両親に仕えた。
He waited on his sick friend.
He waited on his sick friend.
彼は病気の友人に仕えた。
Wait on.
Wait on.
Worry about.
Worry about.
を心配する。
She worries about her children's future.
She worries about her children's future.
彼女は子供たちの将来を心配している。
He worries about his health.
He worries about his health.
彼は自分の健康を心配している。
They worry about the impact of climate change.
They worry about the impact of climate change.
彼らは気候変動の影響を心配している。
Worry about.
Worry about.
Depend on.
Depend on.
に頼る。
She depends on her parents for financial support.
She depends on her parents for financial support.
彼女は経済的支援を親に頼っている。
He depends on his friends for advice.
He depends on his friends for advice.
彼は友人にアドバイスを頼っている。
They depend on each other for emotional support.
They depend on each other for emotional support.
彼らは感情的支援をお互いに頼っている。
Depend on.
Depend on.
Fall behind.
Fall behind.
に遅れる。
She fell behind in her studies.
She fell behind in her studies.
彼女は勉強に遅れた。
He fell behind on his work.
He fell behind on his work.
彼は仕事に遅れた。
They fell behind schedule.
They fell behind schedule.
彼らはスケジュールに遅れた。
Fall behind.
Fall behind.
Fill in.
Fill in.
に記入する。
She filled in the application form.
She filled in the application form.
彼女は申請書に記入した。
He filled in the blanks with the correct answers.
He filled in the blanks with the correct answers.
彼は空欄に正しい答えを記入した。
They filled in the survey online.
They filled in the survey online.
彼らはオンラインでアンケートに記入した。
Fill in.
Fill in.
Focus on.
Focus on.
に集中する。
She needs to focus on her studies.
She needs to focus on her studies.
彼女は勉強に集中する必要がある。
He focuses on his goals.
He focuses on his goals.
彼は自分の目標に集中している。
They focus on improving their skills.
They focus on improving their skills.
彼らは自分たちのスキル向上に集中している。
Focus on.
Focus on.
In accordance with.
In accordance with.
に従って。
The project will be completed in accordance with the plan.
The project will be completed in accordance with the plan.
プロジェクトは計画に従って完了する予定だ。
They acted in accordance with the regulations.
They acted in accordance with the regulations.
彼らは規則に従って行動した。
She made the decision in accordance with the guidelines.
She made the decision in accordance with the guidelines.
彼女はガイドラインに従って決定を下した。
In accordance with.
In accordance with.
In detail.
In detail.
詳細に。
She explained the process in detail.
She explained the process in detail.
彼女はプロセスを詳細に説明した。
He described the incident in detail.
He described the incident in detail.
彼は事件を詳細に述べた。
They reviewed the report in detail.
They reviewed the report in detail.
彼らは報告書を詳細に見直した。
In detail.
In detail.
In general.
In general.
一般的に。
In general, people prefer summer to winter.
In general, people prefer summer to winter.
一般的に、人々は夏より冬を好む。
In general, he wakes up early.
In general, he wakes up early.
一般的に、彼は早起きだ。
In general, the weather is mild in this region.
In general, the weather is mild in this region.
一般的に、この地域の天気は温暖だ。
In general.
In general.
In other words.
In other words.
言い換えれば、
He is very generous. In other words, he loves to share.
He is very generous. In other words, he loves to share.
彼はとても気前がいい。言い換えれば、彼はシェアするのが好きだ。
She is very determined. In other words, she never gives up.
She is very determined. In other words, she never gives up.
彼女はとても決意が固い。言い換えれば、彼女は決して諦めない。
They are very cautious. In other words, they think things through carefully.
They are very cautious. In other words, they think things through carefully.
彼らは非常に慎重だ。言い換えれば、彼らは物事を慎重に考える。
In other words.
In other words.
In the middle of.
In the middle of.
の最中に。
She was in the middle of a meeting when he called.
She was in the middle of a meeting when he called.
彼が電話をかけたとき、彼女は会議の最中だった。
He is in the middle of writing a report.
He is in the middle of writing a report.
彼はレポートを書いている最中だ。
They are in the middle of a discussion.
They are in the middle of a discussion.
彼らは議論の最中だ。
In the middle of.
In the middle of.
Leave for.
Leave for.
に向かって出発する。
She left for work early in the morning.
She left for work early in the morning.
彼女は早朝に仕事に向かって出発した。
He left for the airport at noon.
He left for the airport at noon.
彼は正午に空港に向かって出発した。
They left for vacation yesterday.
They left for vacation yesterday.
彼らは昨日休暇に出発した。
Leave for.
Leave for.
Look after.
Look after.
の世話をする。
She looks after her younger brother.
She looks after her younger brother.
彼女は弟の世話をしている。
He looks after the house while his parents are away.
He looks after the house while his parents are away.
彼は両親が不在の間、家の世話をしている。
They look after their elderly neighbor.
They look after their elderly neighbor.
彼らは高齢の隣人の世話をしている。
Look after.
Look after.
Look out for.
Look out for.
に注意する。
Look out for cars when crossing the street.
Look out for cars when crossing the street.
通りを渡るときは車に注意して。
He told her to look out for pickpockets.
He told her to look out for pickpockets.
彼は彼女にスリに注意するように言った。
They need to look out for changes in the weather.
They need to look out for changes in the weather.
彼らは天候の変化に注意する必要がある。
Look out for.
Look out for.
Look up to.
Look up to.
を尊敬する。
She looks up to her older sister.
She looks up to her older sister.
彼女は姉を尊敬している。
He looks up to his mentor.
He looks up to his mentor.
彼はメンターを尊敬している。
They look up to their teacher.
They look up to their teacher.
彼らは先生を尊敬している。
Look up to.
Look up to.
Make sure.
Make sure.
確かめる。
She made sure the door was locked before leaving.
She made sure the door was locked before leaving.
彼女は出かける前にドアがロックされていることを確かめた。
He made sure to bring his keys.
He made sure to bring his keys.
彼は鍵を持ってきたことを確かめた。
They made sure everything was in order.
They made sure everything was in order.
彼らはすべてが整っていることを確かめた。
Make sure.
Make sure.
Make up for.
Make up for.
の埋め合わせをする。
She worked hard to make up for lost time.
She worked hard to make up for lost time.
彼女は失った時間を埋め合わせるために一生懸命働いた。
He made up for his mistake by apologizing.
He made up for his mistake by apologizing.
彼は謝罪することで自分のミスを埋め合わせた。
They made up for the delay by working overtime.
They made up for the delay by working overtime.
彼らは残業することで遅れを埋め合わせた。
Make up for.
Make up for.
On duty.
On duty.
勤務中で。
The nurse is on duty tonight.
The nurse is on duty tonight.
看護師は今夜勤務中だ。
He is always on duty during weekends.
He is always on duty during weekends.
彼は週末にいつも勤務中だ。
They are on duty from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
They are on duty from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
彼らは午前9時から午後5時まで勤務中だ。
On duty.
On duty.
On second thought.
On second thought.
考え直して。
On second thought, she decided to stay home.
On second thought, she decided to stay home.
考え直して、彼女は家にいることにした。
He agreed at first, but on second thought, he changed his mind.
He agreed at first, but on second thought, he changed his mind.
彼は最初は同意したが、考え直して気が変わった。
They decided, on second thought, to take a different route.
They decided, on second thought, to take a different route.
彼らは考え直して別のルートを取ることに決めた。
On second thought.
On second thought.
Out of place.
Out of place.
場違いで。
She felt out of place at the formal event.
She felt out of place at the formal event.
彼女は正式なイベントで場違いに感じた。
He was dressed casually and felt out of place.
He was dressed casually and felt out of place.
彼はカジュアルな服装で場違いに感じた。
They felt out of place in the new environment.
They felt out of place in the new environment.
彼らは新しい環境で場違いに感じた。
Out of place.
Out of place.
Put aside.
Put aside.
を取っておく。
She put aside some money for her vacation.
She put aside some money for her vacation.
彼女は休暇のためにお金を取っておいた。
He put aside his work to help her.
He put aside his work to help her.
彼は彼女を手伝うために仕事を取っておいた。
They put aside their differences and worked together.
They put aside their differences and worked together.
彼らは違いを取っておいて一緒に働いた。
Put aside.
Put aside.